There are certain things that every black child who grew up visiting their grandmother's house in the 20th century knows to be true. These are not things that were taught in schools or written in books. They are things that were learned through experience, absorbed through the skin, understood in the bones. They are the unwritten laws of the black household, the sacred rules that govern domestic life in homes from Harlem to Houston, from Chicago to Charleston, from Detroit to Dallas. And chief among these laws, perhaps the most universal and the most enduring, was this: you do not sit on grandma's good furniture. Or rather, you could sit on it, but you would sit on plastic. The plastic-covered furniture of the black grandmother's living room is one of the great cultural artifacts of the 20th century. It has been the subject of jokes and memes, of fond memories and rueful laughter. It has been referenced in comedy routines and family reunions, in conversations between strangers who discover, to their mutual delight, that they share this common experience. But the plastic was never just plastic. It was a statement. It was a philosophy. It was a way of understanding the world, of protecting what was precious, of maintaining standards in a society that often denied black families the right to have nice things at all. This is the story of the plastic on grandma's furniture. This is the story of the living rooms that were never really lived in. This is the story of the love that was wrapped in vinyl and preserved for a someday that never quite arrived. Every grandmother's house had two living rooms. There was the living room where life actually happened. This might be called the den, or the family room, or the TV room, or simply the back room. This was where the children played and the adults relaxed, where the television flickered with evening programs and the carpet showed the wear of daily use. This room was comfortable and casual, a space where you could put your feet up and let your guard down. And then there was the other living room, the front room, the good room, the room that visitors saw when they first entered the house, the room that was visible from the street through the big picture window, the room that announced to the world that this was a family of standards, a family of dignity, a family that took pride in their home. This room was not for living. This room was for looking. The furniture in this room was the best furniture the family owned. It might have been purchased new, a major investment that required months of saving or a payment plan at the furniture store downtown. Or it might have been acquired second-hand, a lucky find at an estate sale, or a generous gift from a white family that was upgrading to something newer. Either way, this furniture represented something important. It represented achievement. It represented respectability. It represented the determination of black families to have beautiful things, to create beautiful spaces, to live with dignity despite the indignities that the world so often imposed upon them. And this precious furniture was covered in plastic. The plastic came in sheets, clear or slightly tinted, thick enough to provide protection but thin enough to show the upholstery beneath. It was tucked into the cushions and draped over the arms and pulled tight across the backs of sofas and chairs. It crinkled when you touched it. It squeaked when you shifted your weight. It stuck to your skin on hot summer days, leaving red marks on the backs of your thighs when you finally stood up. The plastic was not pretty. The plastic was not comfortable. But the plastic was necessary, at least in Grandma's view, because the plastic was what kept the furniture looking new. And the furniture had to look new, had to stay pristine, had to remain perfect for the special occasions that might arrive at any moment. The visit from the pastor, the gathering after a funeral, the Christmas morning when the whole family would crowd into the good room for photographs. These occasions were rare. In some families, they were almost non-existent, but they might happen. They could happen. And when they happened, Grandma wanted to be ready. She wanted her living room to look like it had never been touched, like time had never passed, like the beautiful furniture she had worked so hard to acquire was just as beautiful as the day it arrived. So the plastic stayed on. Year after year, decade after decade, the plastic stayed on. Every child who visited Grandma's house learned the rules of the good room. These rules were not posted on a sign or written in a manual. They were communicated through glances and warnings, through the sharp tone in Mama's voice when you wandered too close to the forbidden territory, through the stories of what had happened to other children who had dared to violate the sanctity of Grandma's living room. Rule number 1, do not go in the good room. This was the foundational rule, the rule from which all other rules derived. The good room was not a place for children. It was not a place for playing or running or roughhousing or any of the other activities that children naturally engaged in. The good room was a place for adults, for special occasions, for moments of formality and ceremony. Children had no business there. But of course, children were curious. Children wanted to see the good room, wanted to touch the fancy lamps and examine the decorative objects arranged on the end tables. So sometimes, when no one was watching, a child might creep into the good room, might stand in the doorway and gaze at the forbidden territory, might even dare to take a few steps across the threshold. This was when rule number 2 became relevant. If you do go in the good room, do not touch anything. The good room was full of things that could be broken, things that could be stained, things that could be ruined by the careless touch of a child's hand. There were ceramic figurines on the shelves, delicate flowers painted on their surfaces. There were glass candy dishes that were never actually filled with candy. There were lamps with elaborate shades, antimacassars on the arms of chairs, doilies on every horizontal surface. All of these things existed to be looked at, not touched. And then there was the furniture itself, the plastic-covered furniture that dominated the room. This furniture was especially off-limits. Even looking at it too hard felt like a transgression. But usually during large family gatherings when the adults were distracted and the overflow of guests required the use of every available seat, children were allowed to sit in the good room. This was when rule number 3 came into play. If you do sit on the furniture, do not move. Moving on the plastic-covered furniture was dangerous. Moving caused squeaking. Moving caused crinkling. Moving drew attention, and drawing attention in the good room was never a good idea, because attention led to scrutiny, and scrutiny led to the discovery of violations, and violations led to consequences that no child wanted to experience. So the children sat still. They sat with their hands folded in their laps and their feet flat on the floor. They sat like statues, like mannequins, like well-behaved little adults who understood that the good room demanded a level of decorum that was not required anywhere else in the house. And they sweated. Lord, how they sweated, because the plastic did not breathe, and the good room was often the warmest room in the house, and the combination of heat and plastic and forced stillness was enough to make anyone uncomfortable. But they didn't complain. Complaining would draw attention, and attention in the good room was never, ever a good idea. There is a sound that everyone who grew up with plastic-covered furniture knows intimately. It is the sound of human skin meeting vinyl, of bodies settling onto cushions, of the protest that plastic makes when it is asked to accommodate the weight and warmth of a living person. This sound has many variations. There is the initial crinkle when you first sit down, a sound like cellophane being crushed. There is the squeak when you shift your weight, a sound that could, in the wrong circumstances, be mistaken for something embarrassing. There is the sticky pull when you try to stand up, the sound of skin reluctantly separating from vinyl, sometimes accompanied by a ripping noise that makes everyone in the room turn to look. For children, these sounds were sources of endless anxiety. Every squeak felt like an announcement of your presence, every crinkle like an accusation. You learned to move slowly, to shift your weight in tiny increments, to plan your exits well in advance so that you could stand up smoothly without creating a commotion. For adults, the sounds were simply part of the background noise of visiting Grandma's house. They barely noticed them anymore, just as they barely noticed the way the plastic stuck to their arms or the way the cushions felt harder than they should. The plastic had always been there. The sounds had always been there. It was simply the way things were. But there was one sound that the plastic could not make, one sound that was conspicuously absent from the good room, the sound of children laughing, of families relaxing, of life being lived without worry or care. That sound belonged to the other room, the family room, the room where the furniture was not protected because it was already worn, already used, already showing the evidence of actual habitation. The good room was quiet. The good room was still. The good room was waiting for something that might never come, preserved in its perfection like a museum exhibit, beautiful and lifeless and wrapped in plastic. If there was a season when the plastic-covered furniture showed its true character, it was summer. In the winter, the plastic was merely uncomfortable. It was cold to the touch when you first sat down, but it quickly warmed to body temperature and became tolerable. The clothing you wore in winter, long pants, long sleeves, provided a barrier between your skin and the vinyl, reducing the sticking and the squeaking. But summer was a different story entirely. In summer, when the air was thick with humidity and the oscillating fan in the corner provided the only relief from the heat, the plastic became an instrument of torture. Children in shorts and tank tops would sit on the plastic-covered furniture and feel their skin adhere to the vinyl almost immediately. Standing up required a conscious effort, a deliberate peeling of flesh from furniture that left behind a satisfying sound and a temporary red mark. The backs of thighs were particularly vulnerable. A child sitting on a plastic-covered sofa for any length of time would develop a pattern of lines and creases on the backs of their legs, a temporary tattoo that announced to the world where they had been sitting. These marks became a kind of badge, a shared experience that connected black children across neighborhoods and cities. "You got the plastic lines?" someone might say, pointing at the backs of your legs. You would reply, with a mixture of embarrassment and pride, "I was at Grandma's." The adults had strategies for dealing with the summer stick. Some would sit on towels or blankets, creating a barrier between themselves and the plastic. Others would simply avoid the good room altogether during the hottest months, retreating to the family room where the furniture was old and worn, but at least did not require a medical procedure to stand up from. But the plastic stayed on. It stayed on through the hottest days of July and the most humid nights of August. It stayed on because removing it, even temporarily, would expose the precious upholstery beneath to the dangers of sweat and spills and the general deterioration that came from actual use. The furniture had to be protected. That was the principle. That was the rule. And so the plastic stayed on, summer and winter, year after year, protecting furniture that was itself never really used, preserving fabric that was itself rarely seen. The plastic on the furniture was just one element of a larger system of protection that characterized the black grandmother's home. Everything precious was covered, wrapped, preserved, protected against the wear and tear that came from daily use. The remote control for the television was wrapped in plastic, or kept in a Ziploc bag, or covered with a specially designed sleeve that prevented the accumulation of hand oils and dirt. The lampshades were still wrapped in the cellophane they came in, or covered with the original plastic bags from the store. The bedspreads in the guest room were protected by additional sheets that were removed only when actual guests arrived. There were towels that were never used, guest towels displayed in the bathroom but reserved exclusively for guests who might never come. There were dishes that were never eaten from, the good china that lived in the hutch and emerged only for the most special of special occasions. There were rooms that were never entered, spaces that existed purely for display, maintained in a state of perpetual readiness for a formality that might never arrive. This system of protection might seem excessive to an outside observer. It might seem neurotic, obsessive, a misallocation of energy and attention. Why buy beautiful furniture if you're going to cover it with plastic? Why have good dishes if you're never going to eat from them? Why maintain rooms that no one ever uses? But these questions miss the point. They misunderstand the meaning behind the protection. For black families in the 20th century, nice things were hard to come by. They required sacrifice and saving, planning and persistence. They were not taken for granted because nothing was taken for granted. The furniture in the good room might have represented years of layaway payments, years of doing without so that the home could have something beautiful. And once you had something beautiful, you protected it. You did not let it deteriorate through careless use. You did not let children destroy it with their rough play and sticky fingers. You preserved it, maintained it, kept it pristine so that it could continue to represent what it had always represented: dignity, achievement, the refusal to accept that black families did not deserve nice things. The plastic was love. It was love expressed through preservation. It was love that said, "I worked hard for this, I sacrificed for this, and I will protect it, will keep it perfect, will make sure that it lasts as long as I do and maybe longer." Every family that had a good room also had a mythology about the good room. These were the stories that explained why the room existed, why the furniture had to be protected, why children were not allowed to enter unless accompanied by an adult, and even then, only under special circumstances. Some families traced their good room traditions back to the South, to the parlors of an earlier generation where formal visits were received and important conversations were conducted. The good room was a continuation of this tradition, a way of maintaining standards that had been established in a different time and place. Other families emphasized the economic sacrifice that the furniture represented. Your grandmother saved for 5 years to buy that sofa, a mother might say to a child who is eyeing the good room with curiosity. 5 years of putting aside a little bit every week. You think she's going to let you spill Kool-Aid on it? Still, other families focused on the aspirational dimension of the good room. The furniture was a statement about where the family was going, not just where they had been. It was a promise to future generations that things would get better, that sacrifices made today would pay off tomorrow, that the standard of living would continue to rise. Whatever the specific mythology, the underlying message was the same. The good room mattered. It was not just a room. It was not just furniture. It was a symbol, a statement, a physical manifestation of values that went deeper than home decor. The children absorbed these mythologies even when they did not fully understand them. They learned that some things were too precious for everyday use, that some spaces demanded respect and reverence, that beauty was worth preserving even at the cost of comfort. These lessons would stay with them for the rest of their lives, shaping their relationship to material possessions, influencing the way they set up their own homes, informing their understanding of what it meant to take care of what you had. There was always going to be a day when the plastic came off. That was what Grandma said. Anyway, the plastic was temporary. It was protective. It was there to preserve the furniture until the right moment arrived, the moment when the furniture could finally be revealed in all its glory, when the upholstery could breathe and the cushions could be sat upon without the intervention of vinyl. But when was that moment supposed to be? Some families waited for a specific occasion, a wedding perhaps, or a major anniversary, or a holiday gathering that was larger and more important than the usual holiday gatherings. The plastic would come off for this event, and the furniture would finally be used as furniture was meant to be used. But more often than not, the occasion never arrived. The weddings were held in churches and reception halls, not in Grandma's living room. The anniversaries were celebrated in restaurants or at the homes of children who had more space. The holiday gatherings grew smaller as the family dispersed and the older generation passed on. And so, the plastic stayed. It stayed through the occasions that might have justified its removal. It stayed through the decades when the furniture underneath was slowly going out of style. It stayed until the furniture itself became an antique, until the style that had been fashionable when it was purchased became fashionable again, then unfashionable again, then fashionable once more. In many families, the plastic was still on the furniture when Grandma died. This was the great irony of the plastic-covered furniture. It was being preserved for a future that never arrived. The furniture stayed pristine, but it was never really enjoyed. The upholstery remained perfect, but it was never really seen. The good room maintained its museum-like quality until the museum was closed for good and the artifacts were distributed among the heirs. When the children and grandchildren cleaned out Grandma's house after she passed, they would finally remove the plastic. They would see, many of them for the first time, the actual fabric of the cushions, the actual color and texture of the upholstery. And they would be amazed at how well preserved it was, how new it still looked after all those years. "It looks like she just bought it," someone would say. And someone else would reply with a sad laugh, "She practically did. She never let anyone sit on it." The good room was maintained for company. That was the official explanation. The furniture was protected, the room was kept pristine because company might come at any moment, and when company came, you wanted to be ready. But what company was Grandma expecting? In the early years, there might have been visits from important people. The pastor might stop by to discuss church business. A relative from out of town might arrive and need to be received properly. A neighbor might come to deliver news, good or bad, that required a formal setting. But as the years passed and the neighborhood changed, these visits became less frequent. The pastor was too busy to make house calls. The relatives called on the telephone instead of stopping by. The neighbors kept to themselves. and the formal visits that had once characterized community life became a thing of the past. Still, Grandma kept the good room ready. Still, she maintained the plastic on the furniture and the pristine condition of the space, because you never knew. You never knew when someone important might knock on the door. You never knew when an occasion might arise that required the use of the good room. You had to be prepared. You had to be ready. This readiness was, in some ways, an act of faith. It was faith that the world had not forgotten about you, that you still mattered, that your home was still a place where important things might happen. The good room was not just waiting for company, it was waiting for significance, for recognition, for the validation that came from hosting events that mattered. That validation rarely arrived, but the waiting continued, and the plastic stayed on, year after year, protecting furniture that was being preserved for a purpose that had long since faded into abstraction. The plastic on the furniture was part of a larger category of things in Grandma's house that could not be touched. There was the candy dish on the coffee table, filled with hard candies that had been there so long they had fused together into a single multicolored mass. You could look at the candy. You could not eat the candy. The candy was decorative, not functional, a symbol of hospitality that was never actually extended. There were the figurines on the shelves, ceramic children and animals and angels that had been arranged with care and were never to be moved. Each figurine had its place, and that place had been determined years ago, perhaps decades ago, and any deviation from the established arrangement would be noticed and corrected. There was the coffee table itself, its wooden surface polished to a high shine, protected by coasters that were themselves never used because no one ever set drinks on the coffee table in the first place. The table existed to hold the candy dish and a few magazines that were also never read. Their covers faded from exposure to the light that came through the picture window. There were the curtains, heavy and elaborate, tied back with braided cords during the day and released at night to cover the windows completely. These curtains were never washed, because washing them might damage the fabric, might change the way they hung, might alter the perfect drape that Grandma had spent hours achieving when they were first installed. All of these things, like the plastic-covered furniture, existed in a state of suspended animation. They were present but not used, visible but not touched, maintained in a condition of permanent readiness for an occasion that never arrived. For children, this was maddening. Why have candy if you can't eat it? Why have furniture if you can't sit on it? Why have a room if you can't go in it? The adult logic of preservation and protection made no sense to young minds that saw the world in terms of immediate use and enjoyment. But the adults understood. They understood that these things represented something beyond their functional purpose. They represented aspiration and achievement. They represented the right to have nice things, the determination to maintain standards, the refusal to let poverty or prejudice dictate the quality of your home life. The things you couldn't touch were the things that mattered most, and the fact that you couldn't touch them was precisely what made them matter. Every room has its own smell, and the good room was no exception. The smell of the good room was a distinctive combination of elements that, once experienced, was never forgotten. There was the smell of the plastic itself, a faint chemical odor that was strongest when the room was warm and the vinyl was off-gassing its various compounds. There was the smell of furniture polish, the lemon-scented spray that Grandma used to maintain the wooden surfaces, applied weekly whether they needed it or not. There was the smell of carpet freshener, the powder that was sprinkled and vacuumed up to keep the floor smelling clean. And underneath it all, there was the smell of stillness, of air that had not been circulated, of a space that had been sealed off from the flow of daily life. This smell was the olfactory equivalent of the visual experience of the good room. Just as the room looked untouched, unlived in, preserved in a state of permanent readiness, so too did it smell like a place where life did not happen. There was no smell of cooking, no smell of bodies. No smell of the thousand small organic processes that characterize spaces where people actually spend time. The smell of the good room was the smell of absence. It was the smell of a stage set, of a model home, of a space that existed for display rather than habitation. Children noticed this smell acutely. They would wrinkle their noses when they entered the good room, would breathe shallowly as if the air itself was precious and should not be wasted. The smell told them, even more than the plastic-covered furniture and the untouchable objects, that this was not a place for them, that their presence was tolerated but not welcomed, that they should conduct their business quickly and return to the parts of the house where the air smelled like life. Years later, grown adults would encounter this smell in unexpected places: an antique store, a funeral home, a house that had been closed up for too long, and be transported instantly back to Grandma's good room. They would remember the plastic and the figurines and the candy dish with its fossilized contents. They would remember the rules and the prohibitions and the constant vigilance required to navigate the space without causing offense. And they would remember Grandma herself, standing in the doorway of the good room, surveying her domain with a mixture of pride and protectiveness, determined to keep it perfect, determined to maintain the standards that she had worked so hard to establish. There were rare occasions when the plastic actually came off the furniture. A funeral repast might require the use of the good room when the family was too large and the grief too heavy to be contained in the regular living spaces. On these occasions, Grandma would reluctantly remove the plastic, would fold it carefully and store it away, would allow the mourners to sit on the actual upholstery for the few hours that the gathering lasted. But even on these occasions, vigilance was required. Paper napkins were distributed liberally. Children were watched with eagle eyes. Any hint of a spill or a stain was met with immediate action, a flurry of blotting and wiping that sometimes seemed inappropriate given the solemnity of the occasion. And as soon as the guests departed, the plastic went back on. Before the dishes were washed, before the leftover food was put away, the furniture was rewrapped, restored to its protected state, returned to its condition of permanent readiness. The same pattern held for other special occasions. A visit from a dignitary, a politician, a church official, a celebrity who happened to have some connection to the family might warrant the removal of the plastic. But these visits were so rare as to be almost mythological, spoken of in family lore but seldom actually experienced. In most families, the plastic came down only when Grandma passed away. It was removed by children and grandchildren who were cleaning out the house, who were deciding what to keep and what to donate, who were finally able to sit on the furniture without the barrier of vinyl between their bodies and the upholstery. This was always a strange experience. The furniture felt different without the plastic, softer and warmer and more welcoming. It was as if the furniture had been holding its breath for decades and was finally allowed to exhale. But there was also a sense of loss. The removal of the plastic was an acknowledgement that the old order had passed, that the rules that had governed the household for no longer applied, that Grandma and her particular way of doing things were gone forever. Some families kept the plastic. They folded it up and stored it with other mementos, a physical reminder of a grandmother's care and obsession with preservation. Others threw it away, glad to be rid of an artifact that had caused them so much discomfort over the years. But all of them remembered. All of them carried with them the memory of the plastic-covered furniture, the good room that was never really lived in, the love that was expressed through protection and preservation rather than use and enjoyment. The children who grew up with plastic-covered furniture became adults who had complicated relationships with their own possessions. Some of them rebelled against the ethos of preservation that they had absorbed in their grandmother's house. They bought furniture that was meant to be used, meant to be lived in, meant to show the wear and tear of actual habitation. They ate on their good dishes every day. They used their good towels without waiting for company. They rejected the idea that nice things should be protected rather than enjoyed. But even these rebels carried with them the lessons they had learned in the good room. They knew the value of quality, the importance of caring for what you owned, the satisfaction that came from maintaining a beautiful home. They might not cover their furniture in plastic, but they still vacuumed regularly, still polished the wooden surfaces, still took pride in the appearance of their living spaces. Other children embraced their grandmother's approach, perhaps not to the same extreme, but in the same spirit. They established their own good rooms, their own untouchable spaces, their own hierarchies of protection and preservation. They understood, now that they were adults, what Grandma had been trying to accomplish. They understood that the plastic was not about the furniture. It was about dignity, about standards, about the determination to have something beautiful and to keep it beautiful. And some found a middle ground. They covered their furniture when it was new and vulnerable, then removed the plastic once the furniture had proven its durability. They had good dishes and everyday dishes, using one set for special occasions and the other for daily meals. They maintained standards without becoming enslaved to them, protecting what needed to be protected while still allowing their possessions to be enjoyed. Whatever approach they took, all of these adults understood something that outsiders often missed. They understood that the plastic-covered furniture was not a quirk or an eccentricity. It was a rational response to a particular set of circumstances, a strategy for maintaining dignity and beauty in a world that often denied both to Black families. The plastic was love. It was complicated, demanding love, love that sometimes expressed itself through restriction rather than permission. But it was love nonetheless, and the children who had grown up with it recognized it for what it was. The era of plastic-covered furniture has largely passed. Young people today do not grow up with grandmothers who wrap their sofas in vinyl, who maintain good rooms that are never used, who express their love through obsessive preservation. But the impulse behind the plastic has not disappeared. It has simply found new forms of expression. Today's grandmothers might not cover their furniture in plastic, but they might have rooms that are off limits to grandchildren. Spaces where expensive electronics or fragile decor require protection from small hands and curious minds. They might have possessions that are reserved for special occasions, items that are too good for everyday use. And the broader pattern of protecting nice things, of maintaining standards, of refusing to let possessions deteriorate through careless use, this pattern continues in Black households and communities, expressed in ways that are appropriate to the current era. The young mother who carefully preserves her child's special occasion clothes, wearing them only for holidays and photographs. The young father who keeps his car meticulously clean, protecting it from the dirt and wear that would diminish its appearance. The young couple who invest in quality furniture and take care to maintain it, understanding that nice things represent sacrifice and should be treated accordingly. All of these behaviors are descendants of the plastic-covered furniture tradition. They all express the same fundamental values: respect for quality, appreciation for sacrifice, determination to have nice things and to keep them nice. The plastic is gone, but the love it represented remains. It is passed down from generation to generation, adapting to new circumstances but maintaining its essential character. It is the inheritance of standards, the legacy of a time when Black families had to fight for the right to have beautiful things and were determined to protect them once they did. In every family that had plastic-covered furniture, there is at least one photograph that shows the plastic in its glory. It might be a Christmas photograph, the family gathered in the good room in front of the tree, everyone dressed in their holiday best, sitting on the plastic-covered sofa with careful posture and forced smiles. If you look closely at this photograph, you can see the plastic. You can see the way it catches the light from the camera flash, the way it wrinkles around the bodies of the people sitting on it, the way it transforms the furniture into something alien and strange. Or it might be a photograph from a special occasion, a birthday or an anniversary or a graduation, when the good room was pressed into service as a backdrop for formal portraits. In these photographs, the plastic is less visible, positioned behind the subjects rather than beneath them, but it is still there, a silent presence in the frame. These photographs are precious now. They are precious because they capture a moment in time, a way of life that has largely disappeared. They are precious because they show grandmothers who are no longer with us, houses that have been sold or demolished, furniture that has been donated or discarded. But they are also precious because they show the plastic. They document, in visual form, the particular form of love that the plastic represented. They prove that this happened, that Black families really did cover their furniture in vinyl, that the stories told at family gatherings are not exaggerations, but accurate accounts of a real phenomenon. When families gather to look at old photographs, someone will inevitably point to the plastic. "Look at that," they will say, laughing. "You can see the plastic on the sofa." And everyone will laugh, and everyone will remember, and everyone will feel a complicated mixture of affection and exasperation, gratitude and bewilderment, at the grandmother who loved them enough to make them uncomfortable, who protected her furniture with such devotion that no one ever really got to enjoy it. When you were a child sitting on plastic-covered furniture, Feeling the vinyl stick to your skin and hearing it squeak with every movement, you do not think about love. You think about discomfort. You think about unfairness. You think about how you wish Grandma would just take the stupid plastic off and let you sit on the sofa like a normal person. But when you are an adult, when you have your own home and your own possessions, and your own understanding of what it means to work hard for something and want to protect it, you begin to understand. You understand that Grandma grew up in a time when black families were denied the right to have nice things. She grew up in a time when poverty was the norm, when hand-me-downs and second-hand goods were the best that most families could hope for, when the idea of buying new furniture from an actual furniture store was a dream that might never be realized. And when she finally did have nice things, when she finally did acquire the beautiful furniture that graced her good room, she was determined to protect it. She was determined to keep it perfect, to preserve it against the forces of entropy and decay, to maintain it in a condition that would reflect well on her and her family. The plastic was not about the furniture. The plastic was about dignity. It was about proving that black families deserved nice things and were capable of taking care of them. It was about maintaining standards in a world that often denied black people the right to have standards at all. The plastic was about love. It was love expressed through protection, love that prioritized preservation over comfort, love that looked toward the future rather than the present. It was complicated love, demanding love that was not always easy to receive, but it was love. It was real love, deep love, the kind of love that a grandmother feels for her home and her family and her legacy. We understand that now. We understand it because we are adults, because we have our own homes to maintain and our own possessions to protect, because we know what it feels like to work hard for something and want it to last. We understand the plastic now, and we miss it. We miss the good room with its untouchable furniture. We miss the smell of lemon polish and carpet freshener. We miss the sound of vinyl crinkling and squeaking beneath us. We miss the rules and the restrictions and the constant vigilance. We miss Grandma. We miss her particular way of loving, her fierce protection of what was hers, her determination to maintain standards that the world did not always recognize or respect. The plastic is gone now. The furniture is gone. The good room is gone. Grandma herself is gone. But the love remains. It remains in our memories. It remains in the photographs that show the plastic catching the light. It remains in the lessons we learned about dignity and preservation and the importance of taking care of what you have. The plastic was love. We understand that now. We finally understand. Dear good room, I didn't appreciate you when I was young. I saw you as a prison, a space of restriction and discomfort, a place where I couldn't be myself and couldn't do the things I wanted to do. I remember the plastic. I remember the way it stuck to my skin on hot summer days. I remember the way it squeaked when I moved, announcing my presence to everyone in the house. I remember the way it made the beautiful furniture beneath it look strange and artificial, like something from a movie set or a department store display. I remember the rules. Don't go in the good room. Don't touch anything. Don't sit on the furniture unless absolutely necessary. And if you do sit, don't move. Don't breathe. Don't exist any more than you absolutely have to. I remember thinking it was unfair. Why have furniture if you can't sit on it? Why have a room if you can't use it? Why have nice things if you're going to protect them so thoroughly that no one ever gets to enjoy them? But I understand now. I understand that you were never really about furniture. You were about dignity. You were about the right of black families to have beautiful things, to maintain standards, to live with pride in a world that often denied us these basic privileges. I understand that the plastic was not a barrier. It was a shield. It was protection against a world that wanted to wear us down, that wanted to see our nice things deteriorate, that wanted to prove that we didn't deserve what we had. I understand that Grandma's obsessive preservation was not neurotic. It was rational. It was the response of someone who had worked hard for what she had and was determined to keep it. And I understand that the love behind all of it, the rules, the restrictions, the discomfort, was real. It was love that wanted to leave something behind, love that wanted to pass something down, love that wanted the next generation to have standards to aspire to and examples to follow. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate you when I had the chance. I'm sorry I rolled my eyes at the plastic and complained about the rules and wished that Grandma would just relax and let us live. I would give anything to sit on that plastic-covered sofa one more time. I would give anything to hear it squeak and crinkle beneath me. I would give anything to see Grandma standing in the doorway, surveying her domain, proud of what she had created and determined to protect it. The good room is gone now. The furniture has been distributed or donated. The plastic has been thrown away. The house itself may have been sold to strangers who know nothing of its history. But I carry you with me, good room. I carry you in my memory, in my values, in the way I care for my own home and possessions. I carry you in the standards I maintain, the quality I seek, the determination to have nice things and to keep them nice. You taught me about love, good room. You taught me that love is not always comfortable, that love sometimes expresses itself through restriction and protection, that love looks toward the future even when the present is demanding attention. Thank you for those lessons. Thank you for the plastic. Thank you for everything. With love and understanding, every child who ever sat in the good room.